I'm Cliff Ribner, and I'm going to talk to you today about what happens when the government gets involved in a market. And it's invariably a disaster. It can't be done in a way that works, in any way that anybody would want in real life. And it happens in a variety of ways. There are contraband laws. Contraband laws are when there's a particular product that's simply banned by the government, things like drugs. And what we have in America is we have certain drugs that are completely banned, where the only place you can buy it is on a black market. And there is always a black market when things are banned. It never simply doesn't exist if there is demand, and there is always demand for the products that are banned. That's why the government bans them. They don't bother banning it if nobody wants it. But there's always demand and basically the market is what we call anytime people are simply buying and selling from each other. When the government isn't involved, it's simply a voluntary transaction where the buyer pays the seller what the price that they agree to for the product. And it's how we get everything that we have. We wouldn't have anything, clothes, food, anything, and all the other stuff, luxury items, anything the market is the term we have for where you get that stuff. And in each individual case, the purchase is from a particular seller. In department stores, they have lots of different sellers who are selling lots of different types of products. That's the nature of department stores. It's an ingenious idea that particular merchants came up with. And it's where you could go to a single place and buy everything you could possibly want. Now they even have stores where you not only buy all sorts of things that they would call dry goods, there's also food. Like at Walmart, they have food. And anyway, that's simply the term we have for that. And there is such a thing as market power. Market power is what each of us has. It's not some fantasy thing. The fact that it isn't involved with the government by itself doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It does. It's always there. In communist countries, there is a market. It's inherently a black market because the nature of communism is it bans all private transactions, all transactions in which people buy and sell things that they actually want. So in fact, in communist countries, the only place you can buy anything that you would actually want is on the black market. And the problem, black markets are created by government involvement. And there's various degrees of the banning. As I said, drugs in America are a very good example because they go all the way from being completely banned to permitted to be sold after jumping through hoops by drug companies, like all the pharmaceuticals we buy. They are products that we can only buy. The FDA is an agency that was created. It wasn't called that then. There wasn't really a pharmaceutical business in those days. It was really about agriculture. It was about food. And it's the Food and Drug Administration because the economy was primarily an agricultural economy in 1906. It was beginning to be a manufacturing economy also, but it was still mostly agricultural. But what happened was by the creation of various industries like the meatpacking industry, it became possible for people in cities to be able to have a complete diet with meat and all different types of stuff. They didn't just have to buy goods that it didn't really have to be refrigerated. There were no refrigerators in those days. So you had to buy what you could buy, but people in cities could have a complete diet of food when the meatpacking industry was created. Vegetables have a longer shelf life, so they were less of a problem. But even vegetables have to be refrigerated, and of course, refrigeration came later. Anyway, the Food and Drug Administration has complete control over all that stuff. It's absolutely unconstitutional. There's nothing in the Constitution that permits the government to do that, and we know that for a fact. Because just as they were claiming the right to control, and what this right to control means is they can prevent people from selling it. They can stick their nose in, and their approval has to be obtained before anybody can sell anything to anybody else. Now, the very presence of that corrupts the market, and it means that it's going to be a rougher game for the sellers. Unnecessarily. They have to jump through hoops. They have to satisfy the demands of the government bureaucrats who are involved with that. But for drugs, drugs that we actually want to buy and that are legal, in order for us to buy them, the drug companies have to first prove that they are first safe and then effective, but those terms have a bureaucratic meaning. They don't really mean what it sounds like. They prove these things statistically. I'm not going to get into the details of it. It's first they prove the safety, which is the easy part. That should be the end. Even if there's any argument for government involvement with this, that should be the end of it. The efficacy, the effectiveness part, the reason they have that as an additional requirement is it's basically a Marxist concept. They think drug manufacturers are just out there to cheat and steal from their customers. That's because that's the way Marxists think all business people are. And they can't stand the idea of somebody profiting over anything. Profit is considered the worst evil in the world of Marxists. And profit, in fact, is what is experienced by both the buyer and the seller in all transactions. That's why whenever a product is banned, because there will be demand by buyers, sellers will meet that demand. And the only difference, if the demand is strong, then that means that the sellers have an opportunity to make a great deal of money. And what having a black market does, it eliminates honest and honorable sellers, because only crooks are only people that are willing to break the law, who are by definition criminals, crooks. They're the only ones who are allowed to be sellers. They're not allowed to, but that's what happens. They're the only ones who can do it. And what happens is, whenever you permit evil people into a market, the most evil people will end up dominating that market, because the sellers will compete among each other for market share, and only the most brutal ones will end up surviving. And that's how you end up with, for example, in the drug business, fentanyl is inherently it's not a drug that should be taken recreationally, because it's 100 times as strong as morphine. So a little tiny quantity of it is enough to kill you. And what the Chinese communists have been doing is providing the chemicals to make fentanyl, which then get assembled by cartels in Mexico and then put into all different drugs. I don't know if they sell any of it as just fentanyl. I doubt that there would be much of a market for that, because people would have to be so careful. Basically, it would be for junkies who want a big high, but every time they do it, it would be risking their lives. And by definition, it's just too powerful a drug. It's, as I said, it's 100 times as powerful as heroin. Anyway, what they often do is they add it to heroin because it's cheaper to make than the heroin. So they can have a product that costs them less. They add some fentanyl to the heroin, and then they can sell it. So they make more money. A smaller quantity of heroin will go a longer way when you can lace it with fentanyl. But an additional problem is they've been putting the fentanyl in all sorts of other drugs and not telling people. And that's what they've been doing to kill Americans. 100,000 a year. This is a mass murder that's going on, where people inadvertently, unknowingly end up taking fentanyl when they think they're taking something else. That could only happen because of the illegality of the drug they think they're buying in the first place. The fact when the government makes it illegal, that doesn't mean people aren't going to buy it, but they're forced to buy it from crooks. That's why the contraband laws are worse than nothing. Even if you think that the substances are so terrible that no one in their right mind would want to take it, banning them doesn't do any good, because there will be demand for it. You can't convince people not to buy a particular substance that they want just because there's a law that says not to. And the government doesn't need to be instructing people on what they should ingest. It's none of the government's business what people put in their bodies. That's a fundamental fact. The reality is the only products that there's a legitimate argument for turning into a contraband product that the government can legitimately ban are selling military use products to an enemy of the country. That is something that the government should be able to ban. There's a military reason for it. The rest of it is, the only argument for it is it's for our health. And the government has no business getting involved in telling us what we should do for our health. It's just none of their business. And there's nothing in the Constitution that permits it. The federal government is given very specific powers in Article 1, Section 8 of what they're allowed to legislate about it. And none of it has anything to do with health. And in an opinion in the 19th century that was written by Chief Justice Marshall in a case called Gibbons v. Ogden, he said specifically that And there's one clause the government's using to justify these things, the Interstate Commerce Clause. In that case, in Gibbons v. Ogden, in what's called the syllabus of the case, it's the part of it in the beginning, or in modern cases it's called the syllabus, where the court summarizes its rulings on legal matters. And he said specifically that doing things for people's health is not within that power. The federal government doesn't have the power to legislate stuff to save people and their health. It's none of the government's business. And that's what Chief Justice Marshall ruled in that case. Or that's what is put into the syllabus, is in summarizing the rules. Anyway, so the basis that the federal government's been using for all of these drug laws and all the other contraband laws, all the entire FDA, all the control over agricultural products, which doesn't save anybody's life, by the way. They've never saved a single life. All they've done is they've stuck their nose into it and made the business worse. But anyway, we know that they knew at the time that they created this monster that it was illegal, because at the same time that they were giving the government the power, absolute power over all the food and drugs in the country, they were trying to get prohibition of alcohol passed. And they could only do that by having a constitutional amendment to permit it. So they knew very well that they needed that the Constitution as written doesn't permit them to do this. And that's why they got the constitutional amendment for alcohol. And at least in that case, the country had the experience of it, and it was terrible. They got rid of it in the 21st Amendment, because what it did was it enriched criminals. It literally, what happened was organized crime became more organized and more powerful as a result of those contraband laws. And it didn't matter that you had people like Elliot Ness busting balloons. It didn't help anybody at all. None of that. And that was the one justification for the existence of the FBI, by the way. There is nothing in the Constitution that permits a police force, which is what the FBI is, to invest. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was originally set up by Theodore Roosevelt in 1906 to basically to harass businesses. That was the real reason. They weren't going to be sticking, their nose into people's homes, but that businesses and it was just an open-ended license to do that, and it terrified businesses. That and other things that Theodore Roosevelt did, threatening to use the antitrust laws, which have brutal penalties when they are used by the government against businesses. They impose huge damages and criminal penalties, sending people to jail. And by the way, everything that the antitrust laws, which were created in the late 19th century, everything in them that they ban that's worth banning is already banned as a matter of state tort law. And the efficacy of the state tort law for enforcing that is much better than having the government involved, sticking its nose in. Under state tort law, if someone is actually harmed by another business's operations, not just competing in the market, there are specific business torts, tortious interference with contract, various specific torts, fraud. If anybody is actually harmed by it, they sue the person who's doing the bad stuff. That's the way it should be. That if someone is harmed, then they bring a lawsuit. If no one is harmed, then no one brings a lawsuit. And that when the federal government is involved saying, well, we think there is harm, even though we don't know who it is who's being harmed, that's basically what they do with things like antitrust laws and the securities laws. They stick those added idea of federal enforcement of the securities markets and every detail of it. This was in the 1933 Securities Act. That's what started it. And all it did was it got the government involved in businesses it doesn't need to be involved in. Government involvement in any business inherently corrupts that business. And there's just different degrees of corruption. When you have a contraband product, it makes the entire business very dangerous for the buyers, because the buyers have to deal with criminals. So they literally don't know what they're buying anytime. And that's the most dangerous business, when a product is completely banned and the only way buyers can purchase it, because there's always going to be demand for the product. That they can't legislate that away. What it is the nature of the market is it's just supply and demand. And it's always there. And people are rewarded. They have market power because they have something that the other people want. The nature of market power by itself, when the government is not involved, it's the most wonderful thing. because everyone has it to some degree in our Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which they were fighting the revolution to preserve for us. The pursuit of happiness is the ability to participate in markets and sell whatever it is you have to sell and be as prosperous as you can be, as you deserve to be. I mean, it's not guaranteeing success, but the whole point of the country was to make it a place where people could do that as freely as possible. And there's nothing in the Constitution that permits the federal government to get involved in those markets at all. And the more involved it is, the more corrupt the market. And what happens is when the government gets involved requiring its permission for the sellers to sell, then you have a completely corrupt situation where it's bureaucrats in the government who are making these decisions. And that's a situation where the government takes control over decisions that should be made just by the owners of the businesses. And it happens that one of the attributes of ownership is two attributes. You have the right to the market power and the profits that you get from owning that property, and you have control of it. Now, obviously, you can't use the property to break the common law. You can't use it to harm other people in a manner that would be tortious. You can't use it to defraud people. You can't use it to steal or to lie or to make contracts with other people, to steal from others or to murder others. You have to obey the common law. But when the free market operates within the common law, and the common law is something that existed before the country was formed. It was developed by English judges over many centuries. And what it does is it applies the demands of the Ten Commandments, the only commandments in the Bible which God wrote in His hand. And what God was saying in those Ten Commandments is, these are the only laws you should have. I've just brought you out from slavery and turned you into free men, and these are the rules you need to follow, and only these rules. The implicit in that is, don't make other rules over yourself, because to the extent you have other rules, you're less free. Every time there's a rule, it's taking your freedom away. So that those are the only rules that civilized people need to follow among themselves to remain free. And that's what the common law does. It applies those Ten Commandments to real life situations. Things like property rights, laws of fraud. There's the criminal law, burglary, robbery, murder, theft, fraud also. And thou shalt not bear false witness. That's saying you should not defraud someone. It's not just you shouldn't lie in court. It's you shouldn't lie any place. And bearing false witness, commit fraud. Fraud has various elements. Anyway, the common law is all we need to police us. What the federal government does when it gets involved in these things, it's policing us. It's adding a whole element of policing. It's taking away our freedom. And it's taking away our freedom of choice, because when it tells businesses how to run their businesses and what their products need to be like, it's taking away our choice of products. That's why if you look around, the government has been heavily involved in the automobile business, particularly since the 1960s. And what's happened is the prices of cars are now double. They're literally double what they were back then. And there's much less choice. Plus, because of these stupid rules based on climate change hysteria, they've been demanding, well, originally it was based on fear that we were going to run out of gas. That's why they came up with these rules in the Carter administration, the CAFE standards, where they dictate the mileage that cars have to get. What the automobile manufacturers have been doing to comply with that is they've been using lighter and lighter metals. So cars are basically less safe now than they were, even though we've got all these supposed safety rules like seat belts and airbags and all the other stuff. They've got whole agencies dedicated to safety on the roads. The same number of people die every year as have ever died. It doesn't go down. And because there's going to be lousy drivers on the road. It's an unfortunate fact. But the reality is the cars themselves are less safe. Look at the bumpers. It used to be that with the bumper, you could bump someone in their bumper and there wouldn't be any damage. Now, You've got thousands of dollars of damage if you hit someone with your bumper going 2 miles an hour, because the bumpers are made out of plastic. And they've done that to reduce the weight of the car to comply with these stupid fuel standards. Anyway, that's an example of what happens when the government gets involved in dictating what products should be. People should be able to buy the product that they want, and then sellers will come up with a way to sell it. So that by the government involvement harms us as buyers. It reduces our choices. The government has been dictating how dishwashers should be made. This is also based on stupid environmental ideas that have no basis in science whatsoever. You can't buy a dishwasher that works anymore. The old ones work much better. Everybody knows this. The toilets don't work as well. The light bulbs, we're limited with our choice of light bulbs. And there are whole federal agencies set up to dictate this stuff. It doesn't do anybody any good, and it limits our choices. And at the most dangerous level, where we're talking about things that we ingest, it's really dangerous when they get involved in dictating about drugs. They don't save us. The sellers always have an incentive to have a good product because they're competing with others. If a seller sells something and it kills somebody, nobody's going to go to that seller anymore, and they're going to go out of business. So sellers have all sorts of incentives not to harm their customers. And that's why we don't need the government there to protect us from the dangerous sellers. And if the sellers were not crooks, it would be less risky for the buyers. But the sellers are forced to be crooks whenever there's a black market. And the black market is created when the government bans the product. So the more the government gets involved, the worse the sellers. That's the reality. And when they ban it completely, it's guaranteed the sellers, they're going to be like these cartel people. Really dangerous criminals who kill each other over market share because it's such an expensive operation to run. They want their share of the market to be as big as possible. And of course, there's a limited number of people who want to buy dangerous drugs. I'm Cliff Ribner, and if you like this video, I hope you indicate that and tell other people about this video and about me, and go to my website, cliffordribner.com, and get my book, Freedom's Last Stand. Thank you.